Go ahead and get started. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Flags? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. All righty. I want to make sure you get good in your seats before I ask you this question. All right? Because I need some good energy. Good morning. Good morning. All righty, folks. I have drank 2 Mountain Dews this morning, all right? That means I need some real good energy, all right? Let's try that again. Good morning. One more time, folks, one more time, all right? Because I need a little bit more energy than that. I'm going to be asking that energy this morning. Good morning. I love it. I love it. There are 2 traditions that we usually have, all right? We usually always stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we always have kind of our convocation shout-outs, okay? Now, if you are new, okay, if you're new, the convocation shout out means I'm going to shout either your district or your state out, and I want some major energy, okay? Because we've got a lot of amazing. I hear people, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about that, right? We've got folks from districts all across the country and actual global, okay? Now, folks, yesterday, this is so popular that yesterday I was in line. I had my bags. I hadn't even checked in, and someone grabbed my shoulder, and I was like, oh. And they were just like, shout us out, Norfolk. I was like, okay, Norfolk, I'll make sure of that, all right? So, folks, this is popular. It is our yearly shout out, and I want to make sure that I don't miss anyone as far as our shout out. First, we're going to go with some of our largest districts, okay? Folks, is Milwaukee in the house? We got Milwaukee in the house. Folks, is Heron Academy in the house? All right, Heron, all righty, all right. Now we've got another large group, Townsend Community School. Are you in the house? We got Townsend in the house. And folks, I'm just going to say, because we got a lot of groups from this state, all right, and I need some energy. I know Florida's in the house, right? We've got Fort Myers. I mean, we've got Panama City. We've got so many actual, woohoo, that's what I'm talking about, right? Folks, also, we've got Ohio. We've got Ohio in the house. I've got Ohio there. We got some Ohio folks there. And we've got some individuals from all across the world, okay? One gentleman, this is his 2nd year. He traveled 30 hours to be here. 30 hours. Espen from Norway, would you please stand? Where's Espen? Give him a round of applause. Espen came from Norway, folks. 30 hours to be here, all right? And when he came in, he says, you know, I was sharing some strategies from last year. I said, well, Espen, we got to give you some more strategies, man, so you can share this upcoming year. Also, 24 hours to get here. Saipan, is Saipan in the house? Please stand. Saipan is in the house, right? Also, we have Hawaii in the house, all right? Hawaii's in the house. Chihuahua, right? All righty. Folks, we've got North Dakota. We've got Wyoming. We've got Colorado. We are literally sea to shining sea, folks, and we're global, all right? We're definitely global. So we're definitely happy for you to be here. And we have been very, very intentional this year. We've been very, very intentional. As a matter of fact, I want to make sure that works. All right. Linda, it seems like I'm having some of those problems. Let's see. Let me come on down here. Maybe it doesn't work on stage, all right? Somebody's like, oh. What? Okay, hold on. All right, well, let's go back because all right. Folks, I have been traveling, and when I travel, I've been thinking about what are we going to do this year in the National Dropout Prevention Center, okay? And we've got a treat. This is technically our 35th annual National Dropout Prevention Center, right? We're talking about 35 years. And the first thing I wanted to think was, I want to start with a history lesson, okay? Because folks, to be honest with you, 35 years was when we actually began the actual conferencing. But the actual center started in 1986. Now, folks, who remembers? Raise your hand. Do you remember 1986? All right. Do you remember 1986? Because I remember 1986, folks. I was in high school. I was in ninth grade in 1986, okay? Now, I just got somebody from Kansas City. If you were not born in 1986, raise your hand, all right? That's it. Yeah. She's like, whoop, oh, I wasn't born in 1986. All right. Well, folks, if you were not born in 1986, well, all the Gen Xers, let me tell you about 1986, right? Folks, 1986, I remember I was in ninth grade. It was a different time, you guys. Remember 1986, folks? A gallon of gas was 93 cents, right? 93 cents a gallon. Folks, the most important piece on this list for me in 1986 was the movie tickets. You know why? Because my father would give me $5, folks, and I could go get a movie ticket. I could go get my popcorn, I could go get my Slurpee, and I still had a little money to get my girlfriend some candy, right? You remember those times? 1986 was when the actual center was born, okay? A couple pieces about 1986. Also, Harvard tuition was $10,000. Can you believe that? And I began to do some research. Just tuition alone across the country average $1,000 a year. Think about that, my God. I think we want to go back to 1986, right? Also, folks, as far as 1986, the way we lived, there was a guy, I think you've all heard his name. He, at that time, was not necessarily a sports icon. As a matter of fact, he came out with a shoe that, when I'm talking about in the neighborhood, this gentleman right here, Michael Jordan. Who remember those Jordans? You remember those red and black Jordans? You remember those red and black Jordans, right? Also, folks, you remember the quote, Bo Knows? You follow me? Bo Knows, right? He actually knocked his first home run. He was the first athlete to do the baseball and the actual football, right? Also, folks, you remember Martina Navratilova? You guys remember her? She actually won the Grand Slams, U.S. Open, as well as Wimbledon. And for all you Gen Zers and millennials, folks, this year in 1986, we were able to actually take that old school stereo that we had in our actual dens. You remember that? That was made out of wood. And we could port, it was a portable stereo. And we walked around with this portable stereo, right? You guys remember that? And folks, I'm gonna do this. You remember that? Y'all remember that? And then you had to have your walk like that? Y'all remember that boom box? You guys remember? Raise your hand if you had boom boxes, right? Dr. Marshall had him a boom box. Folks. The music was banging, folks. Rap was banging. You remember rap? You remember that? Whitney Houston? You remember Whitney Houston? We had Cyndi Lauper, Whitney Houston, folks. And as far as a movie, this was my favorite movie that I remember that year, right, was Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You guys remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? I think I've actually seen that thing 15, 20 times, right? And I am a game show person. My family was all about game shows. Does anybody remember the #1 game show in 1986? Anybody remember that? The Price is Right. Come on down, right? People jump up and run down like they're making $1 million, right? You guys remember that? That was 1986, folks. The center was born. Life was great. And now let's talk about education in 1986, folks. Raise your hand if you have heard the words "a nation at risk," right? A Nation at Risk, the report came out in 1983. The actual center was born in the wake of A Nation at Risk. 4 million students had dropped out of school. 16% dropout, folks. Ages from 16 to 24, we had 14% that was the average. And the actual center had to really think through, what are our next steps? What does the research say? What are the strategies? What do we need to get out to districts? And what we agreed was, in 3 years, we wanted to bring everyone together to actually talk through those strategies and build what we considered an NDPC family. And that is the family that we have here. That was almost 40 years ago, you guys. And now let's talk about today. Let's talk about in today. Has things changed? When we think about today, sure, they've changed, folks. Joe Rogan, folks, it is the home of podcasting, right? Everyone has a podcast, right? Even I have a podcast. Everyone has an actual podcast, right? We know that, folks, Netflix has taken over. We've got Netflix, we've got Hulu. What are some other streaming sources we've got? Apple, HBO, Paramount. We know that things have changed all around us, folks. TikTok. Raise your hand if you don't have a TikTok account in here. Wow, that's great. All right? Raise your hand if you do have a TikTok account, right? Right? As a matter of fact, my daughter, I have to regulate. No more TikTok, okay? No more TikTok, right? And folks, ChatGPT. That was something I never will forget. 2 years ago, I was in Monterey, California, and I said, folks, this is something called ChatGPT, and it's going to be a game changer. It's artificial intelligence. And before I said the word artificial intelligence, someone says, is ChatGPT, is that a dating app? I say, no, it's not a dating app, right? I said it's artificial intelligence, and things are changing, folks. And we know robotics are changing. Right now, there is competition to get out the first robots that are able to tutor, teach, and then do your actual chores around your home, right? As a matter of fact, and they're relatively cheap, right? And I talked to my wife about it. I said, baby, they're going to be robots. She was like, I'm against that robot stuff. I was like, well, no, baby, they do chores around the house like ironing. She was like, how much are they? I said, well, I thought you were against it, right? So we're going to be seeing robotics in just a bit, you guys. So for the most part, in the last 40 years, we've come from computers that look like this. Does anyone remember those computers in your home? I had one of those things that I thought that was state of the art, right? Now we're all synced, okay? We're all synced. I got my earbuds synced with my Mac, synced with my watch, synced with everything, right? Actual classrooms, folks, have gone from old school classrooms to one-on-one. Everyone has a one-on-one computer. But the question is, has teaching and learning significantly changed with the times? Has teaching and learning, now we know we've gone from the boombox to Joe Rogan, folks, right? We've gone from the old Magnavox to Netflix. We've gone from the old stereo to, folks, now we can put it on Spotify. But have we transformed as far as teaching and learning? Raise your hands if you think we have, significantly, okay? Raise your hands if you don't think we have significantly. Raise your hands. Folks, I ask this question all across the country, and most people say we haven't changed significantly. And my question to you today is why and why not? Does everyone follow me? Why not? Why haven't we changed significantly in 40 years, okay? The data is telling us we've got to change, folks. The data, has anyone seen the new NAEP scores? NAEP scores, they're showing that our reading skills, 12th grade reading skills and math skills are the lowest that they've been since 1992, okay? All right? A lot of it is attributed to two things they're saying. One thing is the AI they're saying, and then the other is the pandemic. Another thing is our ranking. There was one time in the 70s when the United States was ranked number one across 33 in other industrial nations. Guess what our ranking is now? Anyone? It's 15th. It's 15th, right? So we're in the middle of the group. We're in the middle of the crowd, folks. And what we're seeing all across the country, no matter where I go, is I still hear the same old thinking. And what are we going to always get, folks? The same old results, right? I believe, this is my prediction, just like I predicted, I'm gonna do a Dr. Bill Daggett on you guys, all right? I've been following Dr. Bill Daggett for the last 10 years of my life. And Dr. Bill Daggett 15 years ago said, AI is coming. And folks, AI is gonna transform things, right? And I listen to Dr. Bill, raise your hand if you ever heard about Dr. Bill Daggett saying those things, right? He talked about how things are transforming. I'm gonna make a prediction for you guys because I have been in 46 cities in the last year. And there are some external pressures that I believe that will make us change, you guys. Not motivate us to change, but make us change. The first external pressure, you guys, is the lack of funds. ESSER funds, man, you remember that good ESSER money, you guys? You guys remember that? Folks are shaking their head. You guys remember that good old ESSER money? Those funding sources are what? They're gone. And what we're seeing all across the country is funding sources, folks, are gone. We're going to have to do more with less. Does everyone follow me? Those funding sources are gone. Another external pressure that we're seeing, folks, is something that is called artificial intelligence. In the last year, raise your hand if you've amped up your use of artificial intelligence. Be honest. Everyone has. You know why? Because a year ago, I actually talked to this same group and I said, who's that artificial intelligence? And maybe 10 hands went up like real slow. In a year, I say that, and almost 80% of everyone, some of the same people from last year raised those hands, right? Artificial intelligence is used every day, and your babies are using artificial intelligence as much as they are using their social media accounts. Do you follow me? My child is talking to our artificial intelligence like it's her best friend. Hey, so what's going on today, Siri? You doing all right? Yeah, I'm doing all right, Katie. She's even created her own friend. Do you guys follow me, right? Artificial intelligence is one of those things. It's double. Because what you have to understand, it's kind of a double whammy here because your children right now, when they get your homework, guess what they're thinking? How can I put this in artificial intelligence and get it back to her, right? Without her knowing it. Do you guys follow me? And folks, just to let you guys know, this is a strategy that I've seen that children do. If you've got students in your classrooms and their homework grades are at 100% and their test grades are at 50%, they're using artificial intelligence. You follow me? I just want to let you know that right up front, okay? If they are like at 99%, homework and 30% on testing, they're using artificial intelligence. And I would say this, they're using artificial intelligence even if their test scores are higher. So what we've got to do is, the way this pressure is, we've got to change with the times, you guys. We've got to use it as we're actually instructing those kids. And the last piece, and the most important piece, is this. It's our future world of work. We are preparing students, you guys, for a future world of work that is ceasing to exist. Does everyone follow me? Accountants. If you are going to school to be an accountant, folks, artificial intelligence can do your job a lot better than you are. You can, right? And what we're doing is the industries are changing and a lot of our children are getting out in the workforce and they are unable to find jobs. We're seeing that out of 10 children that are leaving college, guess how many children are able to find jobs out of those 10 children? 30%. So as we begin to prepare our children, we've got to make sure that we're preparing our students for a future world of work. I believe that these three external pressures are going to change the game. And the reality is this, folks, we can't solve today's challenges with yesterday's mindsets. We've got to change our mindset because everything around us is changing, and we got to make sure that we change our mindsets. And that's what we go into, mindset. The first thing that I've seen in every district that I've been in is mindsets around students. We grew up in a standard deviation. Raise your hand if you were ever in statistics growing up, right? Standard deviation. Let me tell you about standard deviation. Standard deviation is you've got 13.6% of students in our classroom that are going to get an A no matter what. You know why? My baby girl is one of them, okay? My daughter right now if she gets a 95, she cries. She literally weeps that she got a 95. She's like, Daddy, I got a 95. Now, my son is like, when he gets an 85, he's like, yeah, I got an 85, Daddy, right? 95, she's extremely upset. If she is not making straight A's, folks, it is almost like she's depressed. She's in a state of depression. That's the 13.6%. Those children right now will teach themselves. The middle group, these are what we consider our bubble babies. Does everyone follow me? Have you ever used that term? Those children that are on the bubble. One half of them we know are going to make it. The other half we're not necessarily sure that they're going to make it, right? Those bubble children, we put millions of dollars in those children, right? And then, who are our babies? Our babies are that 13.6%. That last 13.6%, those are our children that people believe, folks, they're not going to do it. Oh, Latasha, oh, she's not going to do it. Robert, oh, he's not going to do that. He'll never do it. Folks, I got to tell you this quick story. When I went in for my high school counseling, and I sat down, and I said, I think I want to go to college. You know what my counselor told me? She was like, you be good, stay out of prison. That's what she told me. You do good to stay out of prison. I actually told Linda that. You do good to stay out of prison. And man, I've been trying to find her on Facebook so I can say, look at me now. Look at me now. Look at me now. You see? Because folks, I was one of these kids. I was one of the throwaway kids, right? I was one of the kids that folks, oh, he's not going to make it. And folks, some of us, we were the throwaway kids. Raise your hand if you felt like you were a throwaway kid. Most of us were throwaway kids, right? We were poor. We were throwaway kids, right? We weren't the athletes. I wasn't the athlete like my brother. I was the throwaway kid, right? And folks, this was my kindergarten class. This is my kindergarten class. Can anyone kind of pick me out of the group? Anyone? Folks, 34, people say 34. That wasn't me. That wasn't me. That was my best friend. We got kicked out of class together. That was Tony. Me and Tony got kicked out of class together. As a matter of fact, I would just look at Tony and say, hey, Tony. I'd wink at him, and we'd act a fool and get kicked out of class, right? Right? We were down at the corner store eating donuts, right? When everybody else was actually at recess. Folks, the striped shirt. Did you guys see the striped shirt with the afro? Folks, with the big smile? That's me. And I had something, Gen Z and millennials, I had something you guys probably never had in your life. They're called hand-me-downs, right? Raise your hand if you know what a hand-me-down is, right? See, a hand-me-down is when you're wearing your brother's, that's when you're wearing your brother's clothes, right? First day of school, I was wearing hand-me-downs, right? And this is me. I was the 13.6% that I see all across the country. I was one of the kids that they call these kids. Does everyone understand what I'm talking about? See, you got these kids, and then you have our kids. See, these kids are the ones that need to line up, sit down, close your mouth. You're going to end up in prison. These kids are in a command and control environment. And when I go across the country, I see children that are put in a standard deviation where they're numbers. And then I see children that are these kids, control, sit down, or I'm going to kick you out. And then our kids are the come here, sit here, we made a magnet school for you. You guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah, we've done this. Because see, we think that these kids won't make it, but then our kids will actually make it. And what I see is these kids are put into two groups. You're put in the bad group like me, the ones that are going to end up in prison, right? In kindergarten, I got kicked out, like I said, me and Tony every day. And then we've got another group of these kids. And this is where my son fits in. This is my son. Everybody always says, oh. Folks, this is Robert Matthew Peters. I got a quick story about Robert Matthew. Robert, well, we call him Matthew. Matthew was born, folks, and when he was born, he was not breathing. They had to take him over and actually get him breathing. At 3 years old, we waited because my oldest daughter, man, it's almost like she came out of the womb talking and giving directions, right? She came out of the womb, no, yes. I mean, she was like on baby Einstein's when she was like 2 months, right? She just came out just talking, but Matthew wouldn't talk. 4 years passed by, Matthew wouldn't talk. And what I saw was at 4 years old, he would just go by and he had this proclivity to different types of material. Inside of his room, folks, he'd have all of his toys lined up. And when Katie would come by and kick his toys, he would go buck wild, folks. In church, my wife would have him all night dude up. I mean, he'd be nice. You know, church when you got the nice shorts, right, with the nice little, nice shoes. The sisters would grab him, and the minute that the sisters walked away, he would look at them. They bring him right back, right? And I went to my wife and I said, baby, I think Matthew has autism. And she says, no, Peters, don't say that. I said, baby, I've been doing this thing called education for a little bit. I think Matthew has autism, right? And we got him tested, folks. He had autism. He was 5 years old. At 5 years old, guess what happened? COVID. Now, I'm sitting here with a baby who's 5 years old who had special needs. And I'm like, I remember going to my wife and say, baby, what do we do? And my wife says, you're a teacher, right, Peters? I said, no, baby, I'm a middle school, high school teacher, right? I don't teach children how to read. She's just like, well, you a teacher, right? I said, well, baby, see, there are different kind of teachers, right? See, Dr. Linda Jordan, she can teach somebody how to read. I was social studies, right? We don't teach reading. She says, well, you're going to need to teach our son. And folks, I did. I got on Teachers Pay Teachers. Listen, I brought all my resources together and I started to teach. And Matthew, he didn't connect, man. He didn't connect, right? And he would get frustrated. I'd get frustrated. But over time, I was able to get him to reading. And then this is his first day of school where he gets out of daddy daycare, right? And what I saw was, folks, he was happy to go to school, but he was these kids because he was autistic. Does everyone follow me? And what I saw was the minute that he went in school, he got the God bless your heart. He's doing the best that he can. You follow me? You guys understand what I'm saying? See, there are two different kind of these kids. It was the bad kids like me that skipped, but then it was the God bless your heart. He's doing the best that he can do. And what I saw was over time, his reading has just gone lower and lower and lower because no one is pushing him. Do you follow me? So as we're talking about these kids, folks, our kids, we can't lose that we've got to hold our kids to high expectations because our kids can be successful with high expectations, right? And that's what I talk about on my podcast. I talk about what are some strategies that we're seeing all across the country that's really, really working for children, for all children. Because when it comes down to it, folks, it's not necessarily that all children are pass a test, but do we believe all children will be successful? Does everyone follow me? Not all children are pass a test, but do we believe all children can be successful? Because let me tell you about Matthew. Matthew has not passed a standardized test since he's taken one. But he has this thing about airplane engines. And what Matthew will do is he'll just walk up and say, hey, Daddy, that's a 3,700 Cessna. And I'm like, what, son? That is, you know how many pieces are in that engine? I'm like, no, Matthew, I don't. There's 37,000 pieces in that engine. Can we talk about it? Yeah, son, if you want to, right? And then he was like, Daddy, can we go to an air show? And you know what I was thinking? How much money does airplane mechanics make, right? Do you guys follow what I'm talking about, right? Because an airplane mechanic makes a lot more than a starting teacher. Does everyone follow what I'm talking about, right? And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, son, I think you're on to something. I said, boy, I think we're gonna go to the next flight. We're gonna go to the next show, the air show. And we're at every air show. And he looks at them and then he says, he raises his hand. Can I go to the garage? They open up that garage. That's a 500 Mustang. He does that. And folks, this last year, Matthew did this. He says, Dad, I think I want to be a pilot. He says, you're like a principal, right? I say, no, son, I'm not a principal, right? He says, well, you're in education. He says, can you get me in a flight simulator? Folks, if you got a flight simulator, I'll come to you, all right? I have been looking who can get my 11-year-old son in a flight simulator, right? Question? I'm going to New Jersey, folks. I'll be in New Jersey, right? I am looking for a simulator because you know what? If I can get my boy connected to being a pilot, I don't care if he doesn't pass any standardized tests. So you follow what I'm saying? And so what we have to do is we have to understand what are our children's strengths, and we have to make sure that we are putting our children in those strengths. But the thing is we have to believe that they can be successful. Take a look at this video.
I have a lot of memories from when I was a child. One that's always stuck out to me, though, was when I was about 10 years old, and I was in school, and I struggled. And I didn't struggle with English, math, or science. I struggled holding still. And I would try to listen and focus and process ideas, but I couldn't help myself. And to be honest, I would sit there and then I would just start tapping. And the students in the class would look at me and they'd say, hey, stop tapping. A lot of the time, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then eventually even the teachers got after me and they would yell at me and they'd say, Clint, you have to stop tapping. It got so bad that I got sent to the principal's office for tapping. And he said to me, okay, maybe when you go back to class, just try sitting on your hands. And so I did. I went back to class, and when I felt myself starting to tap, I did this. I sat on my hands. And that worked for about 5 seconds. One time I was tapping in class, and my teacher, Mr. Jensen, he looked at me and he yelled. And he said, Clint, stay after class. And I thought to myself, this is it. I am done. Now, I've always been the type of person that believes that a single moment in time can change a person's life. And this was one of those moments for me, and I will never forget it. And so I was sitting there with Mr. Jensen and an empty classroom. And he walked past me and he sat next to his desk and he said, Clint, come here, I want to talk to you. And as he looked me right in the eye, he said, now I need you to know something, you're not in trouble, but I do have just one question that I have to ask you. And he asked, he said, have you ever thought about playing the drums? And in that moment, Mr. Jensen, he leaned back and he opened the top drawer of his desk. And he reached in and he pulled out my very first pair of drumsticks. And he held them in his hands and he looked at me and he said, hey, Clint, you're not a problem. I think you're a drummer. From that moment on, I've never put those sticks down. I've toured, recorded, and played drums all over the world. My whole college education was paid for with drumsticks in my hand. Just because of a single moment in time when somebody believed in me and he saw something in me that I didn't even see within myself. And from that moment, I learned that there's a difference between being the best in the world and being the best for the world.
Folks, I was in Grand Prairie, Texas, and they had a keynote speaker. And Clint was the keynote speaker. And afterwards, man, I walked up and hugged him like we were going to school together. I said, man, I use your videos in all of my keynotes. And he said, we talked about it. And I gave him my story. And he said that the principal, that was the first time that someone had ever seen me. Does anyone follow me? And our work is to see past the numbers. Our work is to see, I see you. Because when children understand that they are seen, folks, then they'll perform for you. If they don't feel connected, they're not going to perform for you. So the question is how are you changing the game when it comes to children and the mindset of we've got to do something different for children? You've got to be able to see those children, not just if they're going to pass the test. You got to be able to see them. So the question I want you to think about is how you're changing the game. And if nothing comes to mind, folks, we got 2 days to fix it, right? We got some amazing sessions because at the end of this opportunity, when you see me and I shake your hand and say, that's from my group from Wyoming, I'm going to ask you, how are you changing the game when you get back? How are you going to take those strategies? Folks, because my favorite show is Jeopardy. But our children are in jeopardy if we don't change. Does everyone follow me? Our children's education is in jeopardy if we don't change. And let me give you a real quick story about Jeopardy. I've got an aunt, she's 95. Her name is Clotilde. And she has dementia. She has Alzheimer's. And I go and see my Aunt Chloe every week, every Saturday. I finish my daddy duty list that my wife gives me every time I get home, okay? And I says, I'm going to see Aunt Chloe, baby. And when I get in to see Aunt Chloe, usually Aunt Chloe is sitting at the TV, comatose. She's literally sitting there comatose. And I can go and say, hey, Auntie, and she won't even say anything. She'll just look, and I can see, I don't know if you've ever seen, but it is literally like you are seeing yourself in their eyes. They're comatose. But what I do is I've learned something. And it goes to their brain research, the dendrites. Something about no 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 no. She wakes up, and we just play Jeopardy, folks. And it's almost like she'll look and say, "Hey, baby, how you doing?" I say, "Hey, Auntie, how you doing?" She say, "How long you been here?" I say, "Auntie, I just got here." She said, you cut Jeopardy on. I say, yeah, Auntie, I'm here. Let's play Jeopardy. And folks, for the last 4 months, every Saturday, I play Jeopardy. And I thought 2 weeks ago, I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to put this in my presentation because if this can wake up my 94-year-old aunt who has dementia, I'm sure some of these questions can wake up some participants in my keynote, right? So what I've done is, we're going to play a little game of Jeopardy. How are you changing the game, right? Jeopardy. Do you know how long it took me to put music up in this actual PowerPoint, folks? It literally took me, I need some techies. It took me half the night to just put that music in that PowerPoint, right? But, folks, we got a question. Let me see. Where's Jackie out of Norfolk? Jackie. All right, Jackie, let's see. What we got?
Okay, I'm going to do real world connections for 1,000.
All right, folks. Real world connections for 1,000. All right, folks. Let's see. What is that question? Folks, what percentage of students between 3rd and 12th grade say that what they learn in school feels connected to their life outside of school? Now, folks, before I get the actual question, I got a prize, folks. This is a nice speaker, right? This is a speaker, NDPC speaker, folks. What percentage of students between 3rd and 12th grade, we're changing the game, say that what they learn in school feels connected to their outside classroom? Anyone? Anyone? Let's see. 9%? No, not 9%. Not 9%. Who said that? 30% it is, folks. Give them a round of applause. Folks, in the United States, 30% of students between 3rd and 12th grade say that what they've learned in school feels connected to their life, folks. I thought that I was going to go through a couple more people than that, right? Definitely. How are we changing the game, folks? How do we win tomorrow's game with last decade's playbook? We're not going to do it. And we're going to talk about changing the game. I'm going to make it easy for you. We're going to change the game in 3 words: resilience, relevance, and rigor. R3, resilience, relevance, and rigor. or rigor, relevance, and resilience, our R3 model. Now, folks, I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. If you want to dig deep into it, our own Dr. Jordan, she's going to be connecting with R3, how it's connected to brain research. Also, we got Adam Wallenfang. He's going to be connecting R3 and actually going through the pieces. But it starts with resilience. After that, we're going to jump into relevance and we're going to jump into rigor. But when we think about a playbook, you guys, the game is changing. I've got a quick video on another prediction, how quickly the game is going to change right in front of us. In the next 3 years, right? If you guys see me in 3 years from now, you guys see me on the street, I just want you to say these words. You were right. Check this video out. 3 to 5 years, this is how our world is going to look like, and this is why we need resilience, relevance, and rigor. Take a look. Folks, the question that always comes up when I show this video is people say, where are the people? In a world of automation, folks, our children are going to be the individuals that are working on these devices. Does everyone follow me? Our children are not going to be the ones driving the trucks. Our children are going to be the ones that are actually fixing the robotics so the actual trucks can drive. So the question is folks, how do we prepare students for a world of work that hasn't even existed just yet? The first thing that we've got to do is, folks, resilience. We got to teach our babies resilience. I don't know. We're going to go through the actual definition. I'm going to let you read that definition. But there is a lot of research that is coming out. And I'm going to ask you the actual question that the research is asking around resilience. And I had an actual great conversation with Jeremy Knapp, who's in Central High over in Panama City. Raise your hand over there, Jeremy. This was yesterday. He didn't know I was going to have him in my presentation today. But the question is, are young people less resilient than they used to be? I'm going to ask you that question. Raise your hand if you think that the young people are less resilient than they used to be, right? And what we're seeing is all across the nation, people are thinking that children are less resilient than they used to be, right? We're seeing things like perseverance. We're seeing things like that. What we see is those things are really not taught to children like they used to be taught to children. Do you follow me? Less and less children are in programs where they're taught to be resilient, like sports and other leadership-based programs, and they're taught to be resilient. And what we see is a lot of children are in their own world, in their own devices, in their own algorithms, in their own AI. Does everyone follow me? And through that, we see resilience, perseverance, and those things fading, and we're seeing a lack of connection. I am more interested in my social group, Dad, than I am with you, right? And even when I ask my daughter, hey, what are you looking at? What do they do? Oh, nothing. Does that ever happen to you? No, nothing, Daddy, nothing. Baby, what's going on? Come talk to Daddy. Okay, later, Dad. But now when she wants some money, hey, Dad, what's going on? Can I have some money, right? But usually what we're seeing is we're seeing children are disconnected. And then in some of our neighborhoods, in some of our urban environments, we're seeing children that feel like no one cares about me. I am by myself and no one cares about me, folks. This is not a new phenomenon. I don't know about you, but when I grew up just like that. I felt like no one cared about me. Raise your hand if you felt like no one cared about you. And folks, I'm going to be honest with you. I really wasn't motivated. I was motivated to act a fool. I was motivated to give the teachers a hard time. I was motivated to clown, boy. I was motivated to clown. I was motivated to do my work, get my 100 so my father wouldn't whip me when I got home. And then after that, folks, I was going to cut a fool in that classroom, right? And that was my whole motivation. And what we see is children are disconnected. No, they're not motivated, and they're disconnected. And it's been since we were children. Here's a poem. I don't necessarily know if you know who wrote this poem. I'm going to give you the person that wrote this poem. But it's a poem from a young man who was a poet. He actually ended up being a drug dealer. After being a drug dealer, he became a rapper, and he's one of the best regarded rappers of all time. But he wrote a poem in high school that says, "The rose that grew from concrete." And what he said was, did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else cared. Think about the emotion that is behind that. And folks, that poet was named Tupac Shakur. Now think about if Tupac got nurtured. Think about the life he could have lived if he was nurtured. He might be a senator now, right? Who's to say? But our children, we've got to build that level of resilience. And Dr. Nottingham is going to be talking and focusing on the 5 factors of resilience. How do we connect with students? How do we create a sense of belonging, achievement, autonomy, and fulfillment? And what are the actual strategies around the 5 factors of resilience? Dr. Nottingham and also Dr. Jordan will be taking you guys through that. And folks, how do you teach resilience? How do you actually teach children perseverance? We have rubrics that we can sit down, and I want you to, at the end of my session, I want you to get the QR code because I can send that information to you. How do you teach children to be resilient? Because we don't have rubrics that teach children to be resilient. And we all have a resilient story, you guys. So I'm going to ask you, what's your resilient story? We all had a time that was our resilient story, a time that changed our life. And I'm going to give you a lens of 3 women that changed my life in 48 hours. These 3 women changed my life in 48 hours, y'all. In 48 hours, these 3 women came together and changed my life. The first was Miss Cleo. Miss Cleo, folks, was a cafeteria manager at my school. Miss Cleo was old school, you guys. Miss Cleo did more cussing than anything. I'm going to be honest with you, folks. Miss Cleo would have been fired at today's standards, okay? When I got kicked out of school, when I got kicked out of classroom and I came in there and they said, go see Miss Cleo, I said, please don't send Miss Cleo, please. Get down there and go talk to Miss Cleo. Please don't. I go to Miss Cleo, you so-and-so, get your so-and-so over there and sit down and grab that broom. Yes, ma'am. But what happened was I would sweep up the floor and I'd listen to the lunch ladies. And as long as I was sweet to the lunch ladies, they let me eat some of the food before it went out, right? And I say, Miss Cleo, can I taste some of that peach cobbler? Get on out of here. Leave me alone, right? But I found, you guys, that Miss Cleo couldn't read. And what I did was I said, Miss Cleo, look at the funny papers. And I brought her a paper. And she said, boy, come on over here and read to me. I said, yes, ma'am. And I sit down with Miss Cleo and I read the comics. And I'd read her the paper. And she said, say that again? I said, yes, ma'am, it's right here. And every day, folks, I get kicked out of classrooms because I could eat banana pudding, I could eat peach cobbler, and I could go down and actually sit down and teach Miss Cleo how to read. And you know what? That was the first time someone said, boy, you are smart. That was the first time I'd ever heard someone tell me I was smart. The second was my teacher, Miss Fitzgerald. Miss Fitzgerald, I've told this story many times. Miss Fitzgerald, when Miss Cleo was absent, they sent me to Miss Fitzgerald when I got kicked out of class, right? And Miss Fitzgerald, I begged her, could I be in her debate team? And she says no. But after 2 weeks of begging her, she let me be in her debate team. And I realized that I could talk in front of hundreds of people and not get nervous. I realized that I had a knack of connecting with people. And I remember the first time I got in front of someone, in front of a group, I did a Shakespearean monologue. I never even knew who Shakespeare was, you guys. You follow me? I was in the inner city, and I did a Shakespearean monologue, and I won. And when I came home, I showed my father that trophy, and he says, boy, I didn't know you could talk. I said, Daddy, I can talk. I can talk, Daddy, I can talk. That was the first time I'd ever won something, you guys. You see where I'm going. And what happened was I was still a menace. And what happened was gangs ravaged my neighborhood. And there was two colors you couldn't wear. There was red and there was blue. And we were in middle school and the older kids would come in and they would beat us up and we would have fights. I'm talking about, folks, 30 on 30 kind of fights, right? And I was brought in, and back then they kicked you out of school. You didn't go to alternative school. There was no alternative school. They kicked you out of school, and I got kicked out of school, but Miss Cleo went to Miss Fitzgerald and says, we can't lose him. This boy is too smart for us to lose. And Miss Fitzgerald says, you know what? I think he's smart enough to get into a private school downtown. And then they got together, and they called my mother. I showed my picture of K.D. Peters right there. I showed that picture. She come out of her grave if she saw that picture, right? She like, boy, you know you got better looking pictures of me, right? But, folks, I showed that picture because that was her Collins radio picture. My mother was a blue-collar worker, and back then, folks, if you didn't work, you didn't get what? You didn't get paid. You see, there was no vacation days. Does everyone follow me? See, back then, my mother was the lowest blue-collar worker, and the ladies called her and says, listen, I know he's kicked out of school, but we think that he can test and get into the private school downtown. And my mother and I got on the bus stop. She took off work, day's wage gone, and I said, Mama, I don't think I can do this. And you know what she says? Boy, don't you tell me what you can't do. You Katie's boy, do you understand me? You can do anything. Miss Cleo talked about how smart you are. Miss Fitzgerald talked about how you can talk in front of people. You get down there and you do that. You understand? I'm losing a day's wage. You understand? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, you Katie's boy. What's your last name? I said, Peters. She said, your last name is Peters. Let's get on this bus. She says, you make me proud. And folks, when I went down there to school, I made Miss Cleo, I made Miss Fitzgerald, I made my mother proud. You see, I got in that school that changed my life. 48 hours changed my life. And when I look back at my resilience stories, I was at every one of these women's funerals, including my mother. And I talked about the influence that they had on my life. See, we all got a resilient story. And if there is the motivation from us, it is to take our resilient story to ensure that that resilient story goes to the next generation. Does everyone follow me? What about those children? What children are you going to motivate in spite of their menacing ways, in spite of them acting a fool in class? So resilience is extremely important. And you've got to go to the sessions to get those 5 factors of resilience as far as the resources. The next is relevance. Are children connected to school? Are they connected to school? Across the nation, engagement. When I go to superintendents and I ask superintendents, what is your biggest need? Do you know the word that comes out? Student engagement. Raise your hand in your district if student engagement is a need. If you don't have your hand up, it's just because you're not raising it, right? Because I have seen all across the country, student engagement is a huge need. I'm not going to go through this actual question, but it seems, looking at the data, that we have a different understanding about student engagement. This was a survey done with about 33,000 principals, superintendents, and teachers and students around engagement, and some data came out that was pretty insightful, I'd say, and telling about what principals thought about engagement and administrators thought, what teachers felt about engagement, and what students felt about engagement. One thing is for our school leaders, 99% of superintendents and 88% of principals said their district has an intentional approach of measuring engagement. Guess what percentage of teachers agreed to that? 60%, right? So we're seeing that engagement from a leadership side is saying, hey, we got it. Teachers like, I don't know if we got it. Now let's talk about children being engaged, because now it's some different data there. 2/3 of students believe AI could help them learn faster. Yet fewer than half of teachers reported using AI to complete tasks, right? So the students are saying this is helpful, and teachers saying, well, we're not doing it. And then only 57% of teachers agreed with the statement, I frequently learn about positive ways students are using AI, while 87% of principals and 98% of superintendents agreed. So what we see is superintendents and leaders, they want to use AI. But what about teachers? They're like, no, I don't know about this AI. And what we're seeing is, do we believe that the students are using AI? Yes. And another thing about AI is this, folks. AI, the AI companies, folks, are looking at the education industry like prime steak, you guys. You follow me? They're like, you know what we could do in education? Do you know how we could teach those students? Sometimes better than even those teachers. Just last week, folks, there was Google released an actual app called the Textbook Killer. I'm going to show you guys a video on the Textbook Killer. It should be out in the next 2 weeks. Take a look.
Google just changed education forever. They've launched Learn Your Way, an experimental AI-augmented textbook system that could replace traditional learning as we know it. Traditional textbooks are static. They're one-size-fits-all PDFs that don't adapt to your grade level, learning pace, or personal interests. But Learn Your Way changes that. It uses Gemini 2.5 Pro to transform regular textbooks into personalized, interactive, multimodal learning experiences. Here's how it works. First, the core content gets rewritten to match your grade level and even your hobbies. For example, Newton's third law can be explained using basketball or art references. Second, the system generates class-like slides with AI narration, just like a real lecture. Third, AI creates audio lessons and teacher-student dialogues, helping you understand concepts in real time while clearing misconceptions. Fourth, content is transformed into interactive mind maps so you can zoom in and out of key concepts. Fifth, events or processes are turned into visual timelines and AI-generated memory aids.
Folks, I'm not going to finish that up, but do you see how in-depth that is? All I have to do as a student is just say, this is what I like to do. This is what I want to learn. The teacher knows my grade level. And you know what? It does everything for me. It actually creates the text, puts it at my grade level, gives me actual activities that are in my interest, right? So if I'm doing Newton's, if I'm doing Newton, I can get a math lesson on the Dallas, well, I'm not going to say the Dallas Cowboys. We got beat yesterday, all right? I'm not going to say that. We got beat by the Carolina Panthers. Let's say the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Let's say the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Folks, but, oh, my God, we got someone with a KC. Go ahead, get that. I love it. KC's in the house. KC is in the house. But, folks, we're talking about something that is interactive. We're talking about something that it can take text, break it all the way down. We're talking about relevance at its core. And think about how we can use that in your actual classroom. And answer these 3 questions that students want to know. I got this from Dr. Linda Jordan. Students want to know 3 things, folks. When it comes to their learning, what am I learning? Why am I learning it? And how will I use it? And the question is we've got to be able to answer those questions through active, engaging lessons that are sensory-based. I learned that, Linda. The 20 senses, right? We got to make sure that we are teaching children in a sensory-based environment. And what we see all across the country, there's 3 exemplars, folks. I know you guys probably have your programs, but you've got to see these sessions, okay? I'm going to give you 4. One is Latasha Buck, all right? Latasha, please just wave your hand over there, right? All right? Latasha is in LAUSD. As you guys know, LAUSD is a huge district, but she is over non-traditional programs, and she's building these small learning groups that are catered towards the needs of students. That's one thing. Youngstown, where's Youngstown? Youngstown in the house? All right, I got Dr. Batchelor there. CTE, Youngstown, and where's Hermiston? Hermiston's here. CTE, future focus, CTE that is interdisciplinary, that connects students. Youngstown's got a 5-star career pathways, right? And one other group, CMS. CMS begins to teach students early. 3 E's is what we say in CMS. CMS is Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Schools, folks. Either we're going to be enrolled, that is enrolled in college, we're going to be enlisted, or we're going to be employed. Does everyone follow me? We're going to be those 3 E's. And they really start the learning in kindergarten all the way a K-12. Where they are beginning to talk about career and the real world of work and actually building curriculum around that, even in elementary. Does everyone follow me? You see? Because what happens is this. When I tell my son, what do you want to be? You know what my son says? I want to be a pilot, Dad. If he wants to be a pilot when he's 11, do you know how far I can get him from being a pilot at 11 all the way to 18? Right? You see? Why wait like I did until I went to college and played. I'm going to be honest with you. I went to college. I was a junior in college. And people were like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm undecided, right? It got to the point where they were like, okay, Robert, you can't take any more 101 classes, okay? You're going to have to actually go and get a degree. I was like, do I have to? They were like, yes, you are, right? But folks, think about knowing that when you're in kindergarten. My wife, she always wanted to be an attorney when she was 8 years old. When she was in high school, she was already saying, okay, either I'm going to go to Spelman, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here. And then my wife said, I'm going to go to Wisconsin. I'm like, baby, we live in Texas. Where are you going to Wisconsin for? It's freezing up there, right? She was like, because that's a top-tier law school. Does everyone follow me? Where are your children? We got to get them at a younger pace, understanding what those next steps are. And that's where relevance is, definitely. And how are we changing the game, you guys? How are we changing the game? All right, we've got a little bit more time. We got a couple more minutes. Let's see. We got how are we changing the game? We got another Jeopardy. All right. All right, we got Jackie out of North Carolina. Jackie. All right, give Jackie a round of applause, you guys. Give Jackie a round of applause.
Okay, so we're talking about rigor. I'm going to go with AI and rigor for 1,000 points.
All right, AI and rigor for 1,000 points. All right, in a rigorous classroom, what percentage of talking should be done by students, not by the teacher? Anybody? What percentage of talking should be done by students and not the teacher? Anyone? I'm going to give her a round of applause. Between 75 and 85%, all right? 75 and 85%, folks. Which is a good segue into rigor. The question that I always have about when I go to classrooms, I take administrators inside classrooms, and I said, let's go to one of your most rigorous classrooms. And they said, all right, I'll take you to one. And I go inside that classroom, and when I come out in 15 minutes, you know, guess what I'm thinking? That's not really a rigorous classroom. The kids seemed like they were engaged, right? But the level of learning was not at a rigorous level. Does everyone follow what I'm saying? It was a really great classroom. The teacher was working extremely hard, folks, but it was not a rigorous classroom. I want you guys to go to Adam Wallenfang's his session on rigor, relevance, and resilience, because he's going to focus on a couple pieces around rigor. This is the rigor and relevance framework and resilience framework, but let's jump into rigor. When I go into most classrooms around the country, I see this. Does everyone follow me? Quad A. I see some great think, pair, share, some great illicit instruction, and I see some pretty strong learning centers. Children are very quiet, they're very compliant, but when they walk out, they're getting A-level instruction. And a lot of administrators are like, that was one of my best classrooms. And when I leave, I'm like, no, they were quiet. But folks, that was not necessarily a D-level classroom. Does anyone follow me? Some schools I go into, I see C-level work. That's a C domain. I see inquiry-based. I even see some Socratic seminars, even some structural debates. And you know what administrators say? You got to come see this D lesson. Check it out. They're debating in there, right? I'm like, you know what? They're doing a good job. But let's look at the rigor. Let's look at the rubrics and let's look at rigor. That's kind of a C, not necessarily a D. We also go and see the B, scenario-based learning, community-based learning, case studies, analysis. We think sometimes that's D-level work, and it's great work. But folks, D-level work is when children are doing project-based learning, when they're able to differentiate and use real-world analysis, not application. Does everyone follow me? See, there's a difference between applying something to me, but then analyzing those pieces. Interdisciplinary projects, right? There is a school, your school, Clayton Bradley. When the ELA teacher, when you walk inside of his classroom and there are projects and you think it's a history class because there are projects all over and kids are talking about more history, but they're talking about the papers that they've written in building a government. See, that's interdisciplinary. That is another level of work, and we want to connect you with that group. And when I go all across the nation, I said, well, listen, that's not a D-level classroom. I went inside of Arizona. I was in Washington Elementary in Arizona. I got some Arizonians there, right? And I went inside of the principal's office and I said, hey, I want to talk to your toughest teacher. And she said, everyone in the office said, Miss Johnson. I said, okay, where's Miss Johnson's class? Down there to the right. I went in Miss Johnson's class and I said, hey, Miss Johnson, I want to connect you to the rigor and relevance rubric. You know what she did? Do what? I said, ma'am, can I connect you to the rigor and relevance rubric? I actually began to go through the rubric with her, and she says, I don't have time for that. Sonny, I don't have time for that. I said, you know what? Let's break it down for you. I said, Miss, I showed her this. She said, what's that? I said, this is a list of all of the apps around education that have been created in the last 60 days. She's like, what? I said, you can do it. Let me work with you. So what I did was I started on the personal assistance. I said, what do you need AI to do? She says, you know what? I need AI to work on some of these lesson plans for me. I said, okay. I said, how many different lessons do you have? How many learning levels do you have? She says, she thought she was going to, I got 4 learning levels. I said, okay, what are those levels? She was like, I got SPED students. I said, okay, you special education? I got 32 languages. I said, what languages do you have? I wrote those down. Okay. I said, well, what's your standard that you're teaching? She was like, I'm teaching this standard. I said, okay, I'm going to put all that in, okay, and I'm going to actually get you the lesson plans. Folks, I push enter. Guess how long it took to get Miss Johnson those lesson plans? Seconds. When she saw it, I said, take a look at this. She says, it looks okay. I said, well, what would you like to add to it? She says, no, you need to add this. I said, okay. So I put that in AI. It added it within seconds. She started looking at it. I said, well, do you want me to get you an actual PowerPoint? She says, yeah. I took that, put it in Gamma. I said, Miss Johnson, how many slides would you like? She says, about 55. I said, let's do 65. What about 65? Yes. I said, would you like a script on those slides? You know what? That wouldn't be bad, Sonny. I said, yes, ma'am. Let me get you a script. Put that in. Guess how long it took me, you guys? It took seconds. Came out. I said, now, Miss Johnson, I can also take this and then get your learning centers based on this. She says, really? How many learning centers can I get? I said, as many as you like, Miss Johnson. How many would you like? She says, can I get 4? I said, yes, ma'am. Then I began to do AI where it built her learning centers in her script, right? Folks, I left Miss Johnson. I said, I'll be back next week. She's like, you take it easy. Folks, when I got back next week, she was up in the front office waiting for me. You follow me? See, AI is the grand equalizer, you guys. We can use it to help us out so we can actually teach children. And what we've got is we've got a step-by-step toolkit in our Rigor, Relevance, and Resilience that'll teach you how the things that I work with Miss Johnson. Step 1, what you can do. Step 2, what you can do. Step 3, what you can do, right? Because what's happening is AI, if we don't use it for our benefit, we understand the students are going to use it for their benefit. This came out in 60 minutes just the other day. Take a look.
What can you tell me about this building I'm looking at?
This is the Coal Drops Yard, a shopping and dining district.
She sees what I see. There's a speaker in the earpiece only I can hear.
What was it originally before it became shops?
The Coal Drops Yard was originally a set of Victorian coal warehouses used to receive and distribute coal across London.
Was coal ever a problem for the environment in London?
Yes, coal was a significant...
Now, folks, if you have a high school student who has never worn glasses and all of a sudden they wear a pair of glasses, right? And they are taking a test, please understand they can put it on mute and they can see the words in their glasses, okay? So, folks, if you get somebody wearing glasses, please understand they might be doing a little bit more than just wearing prescribed lenses, okay? But, folks, this shows you what AI can do. It can help students do what they need to do, or it can help us do what we need to do. And the question is AI is a tool. AI is a tool just like a lawnmower. We cannot use it. Let's look at these 3 lawnmowers. If you've got an acre to cut in your backyard, are you going to take that Leave It to Beaver, that lawnmower and cut it? Do you know how big your arms are going to be at the end of that session, right? Or folks, you can get on that big lawnmower, folks. Get your music. You can drive around, you can spin around, right? Drive, right? That's AI, folks. You cannot use it, and folks, you're going to get big arms not using it. It's going to be a lot of time. Or it's a tool that you got to use, and in our sessions, we'll be teaching you. Thomas Hawkins can be teaching you how to use it. So the question is this, folks. How are you going to change the game? You've got 2 days to get as many strategies and taking those strategies to go back to your districts to change students' lives. I love Jeopardy, folks, but I love Let's Make a Deal. You guys remember Let's Make a Deal? See, Let's Make a Deal was this thing where you come up and you got a bag of money, right? But do you give the money up for what's behind curtain number 1? Or what's behind curtain number 2? Or what's behind curtain number 3? Folks, right now, you are going to be working extremely hard this upcoming year. You are going to be working hours on end for kids. You are going to give your soul to teaching. But you know what? Behind curtain number 1 is status quo. That is, if you do everything, if you take all of that energy, all that money that you have, and you do the same thing you did last year, Guess what you're going to get out of it, you guys? Not the same, you're going to get worse. Does everyone follow? You can take that same energy, that same work behind curtain number 2, and you can adapt a little bit. If you adapt a little bit, guess what's going to happen? You can get small incremental changes at best. Or folks, you can take the strategies that you are getting here, the resources that you're getting here, and you can say, I'm going to change the game and I'm going to transform. And folks, you are going to change lives. So folks, you've got 2 days, and when I see you in the halls, I'm going to be saying, how are you changing the game? Please, get out your phones, you guys. I would love to connect you with the rubrics that we have. I would love to have the opportunity to sit down with you, talk you through some of the sessions that you're going to be seeing. We want to make sure that we're connected as a family. We want to make sure that we are connected in resources. I can connect you with districts all across the country as well as those resources. Folks, I don't have a lot of time. I've got about 30 seconds. There's a poem called Bridge Builder. And it says, an old man going along highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast and wide and steep with waters rolling cold and deep. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. The sullen stream had no fear for him, but he turned when safe on the other side and built a bridge to span the tide. "Old man," said a fellow pilgrim near, "you're wasting your strength with building here. The journey will end with the ending day. You never again will pass this way. You've crossed this chasm deep and wide. Why build you this bridge at evening tide?" The builder lifted up his old gray head. "Good friend, in the path I have come," he said, "but there followeth after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. The chasm that was as naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I'm building this bridge for him." Thank you. All righty, you guys, I opened it up and now I'm closing it on out. I guess what we're doing is we're going to be going to our next session. We're going to be getting started in just about 15 minutes into our next session. Again, if there's anything that you need from our staff, you let us know. We've got some amazing sessions around AI, around CTE, around chronic absenteeism. If there are any questions that you have, please let us know. And please, at the end, we're going to do something called the SPIN Awards, which means SPN Awards, which means we're going to be giving out prizes and some free registrations for next year's conference. Thank you so much.